What happens when one of the most beloved icons in entertainment sits down with television's most controversial host? In just 37 seconds, a single comment would ignite a firestorm that would expose the true character of a man who thought his platform made him untouchable. The studio lights blazed hot that evening as Cher settled into the guest chair across from Piers Morgan. She had come to discuss her latest charitable work, her decades-spanning career, and perhaps share some behind-the-scenes stories that fans rarely get to hear. What she didn't expect was to walk into an ambush orchestrated by a host whose ego had grown larger than his ability to conduct a respectful interview. Piers leaned back in his chair with that familiar smirk, the one that had become his trademark during heated exchanges. His researchers had clearly done their homework, but not on Cher's humanitarian efforts or artistic achievements. No, they had dug up every controversial moment, every personal struggle, every private pain that tabloids had exploited over the years. So Cher, Piers began, his voice carrying that condescending tone that viewers had come to recognize as trouble brewing. Let's talk about your real story, the one behind all the glitter and glamour. Cher shifted slightly, her famous composure intact, but her eyes already showing the first signs of wariness. I thought we were here to talk about my work with homeless veterans, she replied, her voice steady, but with an edge that suggested she wasn't going to be pushed around. Oh, we'll get to that, Piers waved dismissively. But first, I think people want to know about the real Cher, the one who's had more plastic surgery than a Hollywood prop department. The audience fell silent. Even the camera operators seemed to tense up. This wasn't the playful banter that morning shows were known for. This was a deliberate attack, and everyone in the room could feel it. Cher's jaw tightened. Excuse me? Come on, Cher. You've practically rebuilt yourself from the ground up. Don't you think that sends a terrible message to young women, that they're not good enough as they are? The question hung in the air like poison gas. Here was a woman who had spent decades empowering others, who had broken barriers in music, film, and fashion, being reduced to her appearance by a man whose own insecurities seemed to ooze from every pore. I think, Cher said slowly, her voice beginning to rise, that what sends a terrible message is when talk show hosts think they have the right to attack their guests instead of having a conversation. Piers laughed, but it was cold and calculating. Oh, I'm sorry. Are we being too honest for you? I thought you were tougher than that. Tough? Cher's voice cracked like a whip. You want to see tough? Tough is surviving in this industry for 50 years. Tough is raising kids in the spotlight. Tough is using your platform to help people instead of tearing them down for ratings. The host leaned forward, sensing he had struck a nerve and clearly enjoying it. But let's be honest about those kids, shall we? Your relationship with Chastity, or Chaz, as he's known now, that must have been quite the adjustment for someone of your generation. If there had been any doubt about Piers's intentions, they evaporated in that moment. He had just weaponized a mother's love for her child, turning one of the most personal and beautiful journeys in Cher's life into ammunition for his verbal assault. Cher's face went pale, then flushed red. How dare you? I'm just asking the questions that people want answered, Piers replied with fake innocence. Surely you understand that when you're in the public eye, nothing is off limits. Everything is off limits when it comes to attacking my children. You're shot back, her voice now trembling with controlled fury. You can say whatever you want about me, but you keep my family out of your mouth. The studio had become a powder keg, and Piers Morgan was playing with matches. His production team was probably celebrating in the control room, knowing they had struck television gold, but they had also unleashed something they weren't prepared for. The full force of a mother protecting her cubs. Look, I understand you're defensive, Piers continued, his tone now dripping with false sympathy. But when you put your family in the spotlight, you have to expect some scrutiny. It comes with the territory of being a celebrity. Scrutiny? Cher's voice rose another octave. You call attacking a transgender person scrutiny? You call questioning a mother's love scrutiny? I'm simply pointing out that your very public support might be seen as overcompensation for initial rejection. Piers pressed on, clearly unaware that he had just crossed a line that should never be crossed. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the audience seemed to be holding its breath. Cher stared at Piers Morgan with a look that could have melted steel. When she finally spoke, her voice was deadly quiet. Let me tell you something about rejection, you pathetic excuse for a journalist. The words cut through the studio like a blade. Cher's voice had dropped to a whisper, but somehow it carried more power than if she had been screaming. Every person in that room knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. something that would be talked about for years to come. I have loved and supported my child through every step of his journey, and I will not sit here and let some two-bit shock jock question that love for his ratings. Yer continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. You want to talk about rejection? Let's talk about how you've been rejected by every decent network until you found one desperate enough to give you a platform. Piers' smirk faltered for the first time. This wasn't going according to his script. Guests were supposed to get flustered, defensive, maybe storm off in tears. They weren't supposed to turn the tables and expose him in front of his own audience. Now hold on just a minute, Piers tried to interject, but Cher wasn't finished. No, you hold on, she snapped, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at him. You sit there in your cheap suit thinking you're some kind of journalistic heavyweight, but all you are is a bully with a microphone. You wouldn't know real journalism if it bit you on your arrogant behind. The audience was completely silent, but you could feel the electricity in the air. This was no longer an interview. This was a reckoning. And Piers Morgan was about to learn what happened when he picked a fight with someone who had been through real battles. I think you're overreacting, Piers said, his voice now lacking its earlier confidence. This is just good television. Good television? Cher's laugh was sharp and bitter. Good television is when you actually ask meaningful questions. Good television is when you treat your guests with respect. What you're doing is cheap, lazy, and frankly, pathetic. Piers was beginning to sweat under the studio lights, and it wasn't from the heat. He had miscalculated badly. This wasn't some starlet who would crumble under pressure. This was Cher, a woman who had survived decades in one of the most brutal industries on earth, who had faced down critics, tabloids, and industry executives who made Piers Morgan look like a choir boy. Let me ask you something, Piers, Cher said, leaning forward in her chair. When was the last time you did anything meaningful with your platform? When did you last use your show to actually help someone instead of tearing them down? I interview world leaders, Piers protested weakly. I cover important stories. You ambush celebrities and call it journalism? Cher fired back. You take people's pain and turn it into entertainment. That's not journalism, that's vulture behavior. The control room must have been in panic mode. This was supposed to be a routine celebrity interview, the kind that generated buzz and clips for social media. Instead, their star host was being systematically destroyed by a guest who refused to play his game. I think we should move on, Piers said, desperately trying to regain control of his own show. Oh no, Cher said with a dangerous smile. You wanted to have this conversation. You wanted to dig into personal territory, so let's dig. Let's talk about your personal life. Let's talk about your failures. Piers' face went white. The hunter had become the hunted, and he clearly didn't like how it felt. That's different, he stammered. How is it different? Cher demanded. Because you're the one asking the questions? Because you think your personal life should be off limits while everyone else's is fair game? That's not how this works, sweetheart. The endearment was delivered with such venom that it might as well have been a curse word. Cher had turned his own tactics against him, and the result was devastating. The man who built his career on making others uncomfortable was now squirming in his own chair. You know what your problem is, Piers? Cher continued, her voice now steady and controlled, like a surgeon making precise cuts. You mistake cruelty for cleverness. You think that being mean makes you interesting, but all it really does is show everyone what a small, insecure little man you really are. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Piers opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For perhaps the first time in his career, the man who always had a comeback was completely speechless. His face had gone from white to red, and beads of sweat were visible on his forehead despite the studio's air conditioning working overtime. I have spent my entire career lifting people up, Cher pressed on, her voice gaining momentum like a freight train. I've used my platform to shine light on important causes, to give voice to the voiceless, to show love to people who desperately need it. What have you done? What legacy are you building with this garbage you call television? The audience was completely transfixed. This wasn't just a celebrity meltdown or a heated exchange. This was a masterclass in how to handle a bully, delivered by someone who had earned the right to speak with such authority. Every person in that studio knew they were witnessing television history, but not the kind Piers had intended to create. You want to know about my plastic surgery? Cher continued, her voice now rising again. Fine, I've had work done. So what? I'm 70+ years old and I've earned the right to do whatever makes me feel good about myself. But you know what real plastic surgery looks like? It's when someone tries to rebuild their entire personality because the original was so rotten that nobody could stand to be around it. Piers tried to laugh it off, but the sound that came out was more like a wheeze. His trademark confidence had evaporated completely, leaving behind a man who looked like he wanted nothing more than to crawl under his desk and hide. And since you want to talk about my son, Cher said, her voice becoming dangerously quiet again, let me educate you on what real love looks like. Real love means supporting your child no matter what. Real love means celebrating their courage when they live their truth. Real love means protecting them from small-minded people who think they have the right to judge. The silence that followed was so complete, you could have heard a pin drop. Even the camera operators had stopped moving, afraid that any sound might break the spell that Cher had cast over the entire studio. You sit there and question my love for my child? Cher's voice began to tremble with emotion, but not from weakness. This was pure righteous anger, the fury of a mother whose cub had been attacked. You have no idea what Love Island Love isn't performing for cameras or creating controversy for ratings. Love is showing up day after day, year after year, no matter what the world throws at you. Piers looked like he wanted to disappear. His show, his studio, his carefully crafted persona, all of it was crumbling around him in real time. He tried one last desperate attempt to regain control. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here, he said, his voice shaking slightly. Why don't we start over and talk about your charity work? Cher stared at him for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was ice cold. You think you can just wave a magic wand and pretend the last 20 minutes didn't happen? You think you can attack me, attack my family, show your true colors to the world, and then just change the subject when it doesn't go your way? She stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and powerful. The studio lights caught her perfectly, and in that moment, she looked every inch the icon she had always been. Strong, defiant, and absolutely magnificent in her fury. Here's the thing about bullies, Cher said, looking directly into the main camera as if she were speaking to every viewer personally. They're only tough when they think they have the upper hand. The moment someone stands up to them, they crumble like the cowards they really are. Piers was now visibly panicking. His producers were probably screaming in his earpiece, but there was nothing they could do. The train had left the station, and Cher was the conductor. You know what? Cher said, reaching for the small microphone clipped to her jacket. I came here to talk about helping homeless veterans, about using my platform for good, about making the world a little bit better. Instead, I walked into an ambush by a man who wouldn't recognize decency if it smacked him in his smug face. She unclipped the microphone and held it up for everyone to see. I don't need this, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent studio without amplification. I don't need your show, I don't need your platform, and I certainly don't need to sit here and be disrespected by someone who built his career on other people's pain. She dropped the microphone onto the coffee table between them. The small thud it made seemed to echo through the studio like a thunderclap. Enjoy your ratings, Cher said, turning toward the exit. I hope they're worth your soul. And with that, she walked away. Not stormed off, not ran away in tears, but walked away with the dignity and grace of someone who knew exactly who they were and what they stood for. Each step was measured, powerful, and final. Piers sat frozen in his chair, watching helplessly as one of the biggest stars in entertainment history disappeared through the studio doors. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of his humiliation, his complete and total defeat at the hands of a woman who had refused to be his victim. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before Piers finally found his voice. Well, he said weakly, his voice barely above a whisper, we'll be right back after this commercial break. But everyone in that studio knew the truth. There would be no coming back from this. In 37 seconds of pure arrogance and cruelty, Piers Morgan had destroyed his own show and handed Cher the greatest victory of her already legendary career.